sculpted windmills, but by God, I've never been Zach Gallen. I want to be Zach Gallen.
Welcome back to Beyond the Beermat, the podcast that combines all the nostalgia that you know and love versus all the present things that you know and love, which is to say, we talk about a lot of nostalgia things because the present is not a good and it makes. Do you know what? I've actually just stopped myself mid-thought because I'm the guy that defends the present, so I shouldn't be the guy, especially during the intro, that is attacking the present. My name is Stuart Quigley. Alongside me is...
It's Matt Still, alright?
Not still Matt.
The one that's not Billy.
That would be a very good definition of who you actually are.
Mm-hmm.
Right, before we get into the main topic of discussion for today's podcast, you noticed that we are right on the horizons. We are quite literally hot on the heels of the release of WWE 2K19. And I want to get into this with you actually, because I am not very much a gamer, and I'm not specifically, despite everything that you would expect of me, a wrestling gamer. This isn't... I've read all the stuff, I've seen all the things, but for whatever reason, aside from the Daniel Bryan stuff, this doesn't appeal to me. You, as someone that have played... What was the last one you played?
The last generation with Brock Lesnar on the front, 2K16? 17 maybe?
17.
Yeah, I think so.
So as someone that has actually played them up until relatively recently, like, A, what have you seen of this game specifically, and B, is there enough for me to get excited about, or is it just a case of it's kind of just FIFA but for wrestling?
Don't buy it.
Well done.
2 big thumbs down
Really?
for
That
wrestling
bad?
games. Yeah, like I said, I've only played the last generation games, unfortunately. No, maybe fortunately actually, because new generation games cost an absolute arm and a leg anyway.
Well, this one with the whole thing is 70 quid some of
it.
it. Yeah.
Oh, is that the Super Ric Flair edition where you get a little bit of his loam?
Yeah.
A bit of his loam, a bit of his robe thing.
Yeah.
Just a little tiny section on a glass plate. Actually, the last...
I kind of would buy that actually, I'm not gonna lie.
Would you?
I'd rather like pay 70 quid for just that than for the game.
In the last edition that they released, 2K18, you got a little piece of, I think it was the WrestleMania ring, that actually cut the canvas on the bottom of the ring, and you got a little bit of that next to a picture of like Shinsuke Nakamura or some shit like that.
How many pieces did they cut up? That must have been fucking tiny.
I'd imagine so. I didn't bother buying it, did I, Stu? Because I'm not stupid. Anyway, it's the same game every year, unfortunately, and it has been for donkey's years now. It's an updated roster, that's all it is, and that's the same as FIFA, unfortunately.
This is exactly what I said. And the thing that disappoints me is you said it's the same game with an updated roster, and I'm not even sure if this is a gimmick, but this is kind of why I'm bringing this up. Like Ciampa not being in it, it's a very big deal.
Yeah, you would have thought the NXT champion would actually be in there. But you can see what they're already doing. They're going to tell it is why the whole point why you should buy DLC and like downloadable content and all that extra shit. Buy all that to get all these people that you would have expected in the initial release anyway.
That's kind of a thing with computer games full stop, but I think with WWE it's a case of... Have you watched, and I did before we started this, the first time I've seen this in ages, I watched the trailer for the game.
Oh yeah, I've watched it a couple of times.
And I can't quite fathom this idea, and it kind of sums up wrestling in a way that like, there's more to do with stuff that used to happen versus stuff that's happening now.
How do you mean? Because only like 2 years ago they had... I don't know if it was like Steve Austin's career path, and so that was years and years ago, and you're releasing a game like almost 20 years later, and you're actually revisiting his whole career. What do you mean, like just back history? What are they showing? Because from the trailer I've watched, they've shown the Bray Wyatt House of Horrors bullshit match with Randy Orton, complete garbage.
Yeah, it's a bit...
They touted that basically. Triple H coming up like a zombie, which was a line of wrestling toys they had a few years back, and big head mode. Result, everyone wants big heads.
Jeez. Well, funny enough, the trailer I saw was, it starts with Bray Wyatt, a bit of fire. I'm not sure if it's a Randy Orton sort of burning it down thing. It's definitely similar symbolism. Triple H is in there, and Matt Hardy's in there, and already, like, I'm 30 seconds into this trailer, and I know I'm watching it now, as opposed to when it was released.
Yeah.
And I'm a bit like, oh, this is already out of date, and that's the problem with wrestling in a certain sense, that like, it's really hard to stay current. We struggle with this idea of whenever we talk about something, usually within 3 or 4 days, someone said something that we didn't have a chance to address at the time, and it makes us look stupid. And we're not necessarily reviewing Raw or SmackDown. It's the idea that WWE themselves are releasing or doing anything that within 2 or 3 months will look out of date is it's the kind of the nature of the beast in a way. But the other stuff in this trailer,
it shouldn't be though. It shouldn't be because yes, you're not going to in certain elements of this game. You've got your typical sort of exhibition match where you can just have whatever you want. You can fantasy book it yourself. You've got your universe to do your whole fantasy booking. You've got this career thing that you've got in the current game, which is just specifically about Daniel Bryan. So the equivalent of what they've done for, like I said, Steve Austin or Bret Hart, I think they've done in the past as well.
That's at least slightly more relevant.
And so, yeah, but that's just story mode in there, like you'd have in any video game. The rest of it, I don't know, does FIFA have any sort of story mode? The new NFL game does. I'm sure FIFA must do as well.
The Journey with Alex Hunter.
Yeah, where you pick your footballer and you basically play him throughout the career, although it's already predetermined what the outcome is. I'll tell you what the biggest problem with wrestling games is, the fact that they can't decide whether they want to be kayfabe or they want to be a sort of simulation. The problem is, wrestling as a whole is kayfabe. It's all predetermined. You know how it's going to work out.
It should be a fighting game.
Yeah, and for the newer product as it is now, it is a fighting game, but because you've got the fighting element in there where you set it to easy difficulty and you dick all over everyone, you know, when you've been playing it for donkey's years or hours and hours, up the difficulty, you're still going to win the majority of matches. And so there's only so far you can go in terms of this whole career. Basically, the end point of any wrestling game is you've won the belt, and then you're on a cycle of playing against John Cena, Triple H, I don't know, throw in another major superstar, and you just play them 3 weeks at a time. You have a pay-per-view, the storyline ends. Then you move on to the next person, 3 weeks, storyline ends.
That's not too dissimilar to actual wrestling, to be fair.
No, exactly. But the problem is they can't figure out whether they want to be a simulation game or an actual storyline-based game.
I think you've hit on something there, but I also think like, fundamentally the replayability of any other sports game, like a football game, NFL, basketball, UFC even to a certain degree. Actually, UFC is a good comparison to make because when you play the UFC game, it's almost similar to when you play the WWE game. It's like you win the title, you have a couple of defences with the title, and then once you get to that point, which realistically speaking, if you spent 70 quid on a game is relatively quickly, there's not that much to do after that. I think other sports like football and basketball, for example, you could get this idea of like, yeah, I'll play at least a few seasons just because I could have players to my team. I won the Premier League this year, but I want to win the Champions League next year, etc. Whereas with something like this, it's like you win the world title, there's no other challenges really out there for you.
No.
And you kind of can be done very quickly.
That's what I felt with FIFA. When I created the greatest football team of all time, Ultimate Fulham FC, created a completely new kit. All the fans were waving different flags, you know when you could really customise it in the best version of FIFA, which was FIFA 06.
How long did this take you though, is what I would say?
Not long at all, to be fair.
Not in terms of like real life, but just in terms of actual seasons in the game.
I won everything I needed to do in the second season.
But this is what I'm saying, it's like in wrestling games, you could sort of do it in the first.
Exactly, yeah, just bang out. I think the benefit UFC has, the UFC games, if you've ever played them in the past, maybe it's because I haven't played them as in depth, but they're fairly hard to do. Whatever I've done in terms of the amount of controls, sounds like I've got like backwards hands that don't work. My left is my right. I don't know what I'm doing. But from what I've realised with any wrestling game or FIFA even, all you do is you play through the same old cycle, and it doesn't matter who you're playing against. You find the winning formula and you just do the same thing.
That is kind
rinse and repeat.
Yeah,
and it's done.
I think that applies to any sort of game, to be fair, because I know definitely that, like, let's put it this way, I haven't played any console games. I've been very much out of the system, out of the cycle for years. I hadn't played a FIFA from probably well before the turn of the century. This is how long I'm talking.
Yeah.
And earlier this year, I recently got, due to significant other, a console and the latest incarnation of FIFA. Do you know how long it took me to pick it back up? Just the idea of like passing, shooting, doing this, doing that.
I reckon not long at all, really.
A day.
Yeah, exactly. The controls don't change.
Yeah.
You're changing the roster. It's the same formula, isn't it? Over and over.
As soon as I know what sprint and tackle are, I'm fine.
It's like, well, what do you want from a video game? You either have a sports simulation game. I don't want to get into like specific genres. A sports simulation game, which, like you said, you pick up the controls in a day and you do what you need to, and you know how to do the game and just do that. You play the same game of Ultimate Fulham FC, the greatest team ever made, against everyone that's ever played in all of the cups. Or you play a sort of standard linear Tomb Raider-esque game. It's sort of a platformer, sort of an action game. All you're getting is 5 hours of story from that though. You could say Tomb Raider, Assassin's Creed, multiple other games. It's just a linear story. So then the next step is, I don't want to vary too far away from wrestling, but then you've got the likes of open world sandbox games. So you've got GTA, which is still getting a shitload of hits on YouTube. People are still watching that because it lets you build your own levels and all that. You've got the likes of Fortnite, which is also another open world game.
I'll go one with even like far less sort of effort.
Say Minecraft.
No, I wasn't. I was the idea of like, I've seen, if you go on YouTube and you see this over and over again, this is a very sort of 2D style thing. But look how much money Mario Maker made for Nintendo.
Oh yeah, build your own levels.
Yeah.
So then it has that replayability. But
What,
so
you can't apply that though?
You can't what to a wrestling game?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you should have endless amount of fantasy matches. Going back to SmackDown versus Raw, like 2009, it had over 100 possible variants to matches. They always tell it as though you've got like a million different ways of building a match, but you haven't. Come on. Once you've added 2 people to a Hell in a Cell, add a 3rd person, add a 4th person, it's the same thing over and over again, isn't it? You're just adding an extra competitor. And that's what wrestling games are. They're not really missing it, are they? They've got enough matches, and so you should be able to just change the participants. It should be a different match. The problem is the AI isn't good enough, even on the newest, latest generation consoles, or even if you've got a high-end PC. The computer, unfortunately, isn't clever enough to act basically how a real performer would act. A computer hasn't got the capacity to understand that when Randy Savage just stood on the top ropes, he points at the sky, or CM Punk starts jibbing off the crowd halfway through a match.
I'll give you an even more sort of harsh version of this. I know for a fact that this was probably eliminated from games at least 10 years ago, but I distinctly remember an older version of WWE 2K whatever, whereby if you set up a table next to someone, they would put you through it automatically, costing themselves, giving you the DQ win, and that was how you got yourself up the ladder.
Yeah, it's just glitches, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like exploiting the glitches, and that's the problem with computers. It's not that they're not up to date, it's just they haven't got the capacity to actually do anything in its truest form. So going back to football, because you're obviously into football, but if you play Liverpool versus, pick a random team from anywhere in the world.
Barcelona.
Right, the most obscure of teams.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you've played 7 games against Premier League teams and then you suddenly jump and play against Barcelona, you still basically do the same thing, won't you? You still play the same way you've played, and you still probably dick all over them because the computer hasn't learned.
Oh yeah, it's a strange one though, because it's like, just to give that example and that parallel, this idea of like, if I'm playing FIFA for example, and I'm playing in the Premier League against Watford, against Burnley, Stoke, Swansea, Accrington Stanley, Tranmere, Burton Albion, Fulham, yeah,
the best team in the
whoever, and then I'll play like at Barcelona, Real Madrid, whoever. Like, you have your context in your head of who these people are and this and that. It doesn't seem to apply to wrestling games in the sense of like, you don't really tend to, from what I've seen on YouTube and from what you see in gameplays and whatnot, this idea of like, if you're in game fighting against Titus O'Neil, there doesn't appear to be massive difference between fighting against him and like Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
The sprites are different, but
that's all it is.
Yeah.
The computer hadn't learned.
I do think as well there is a certain sense of like, you can fantasy in like, you create a footballer. You would think create a wrestler would be a lot better in that regard. That like, I'm putting me in the WWE for example. And when you create a footballer and you put them into FIFA, you go like, okay, I can see it, but like, I wouldn't have thought those two things, or those would be as far apart as possible. When you create the wrestler, it's effectively, it's just another goal. As soon as you do it.
The other issue is as well with like fantasy booking. If you create a wrestler in WWE 2K19 or whatever, you might want to fantasy book it in terms of you go into universal career mode, university career mode. You go in the
you go to like
you go to school, wrestling school.
I'd buy that as a game.
You do that in one of the older games, and you got old Albert stood on the outside of the ring where he's telling you what you should be doing. The problem is, because a games console or a computer isn't advanced enough, you have to lose matches yourself. You're playing as player one, and you have to wait for the computer to build up enough finishers to actually put you away, or intentionally sabotage yourself to book yourself in that whole fantasy booking in terms of this is the storyline and this is how I want it to play out. So I've got a career where I'm eventually going to win the belt at WrestleMania, I'm going to win the Royal Rumble, and go on and beat Backlash and No Way Out and all that shit filler in between. But in between that, if you're going to look like the underdog, you have to start losing matches yourself. The computer won't know that that's what you want to do. You have to sabotage yourself, put yourself through a table and disqualify yourself. But like I said, because the computer isn't advanced enough anyway, come the next week where you suddenly look like the underdog, you're then doing the same match again. It's bullshit. Yeah. You're not going anywhere. It's just a waste of time.
Again, I know I've said this before in this sort of preamble, which actually has gone a lot longer than I expected, but that seems like a very similar parallel to actual wrestling itself. So maybe in a way, WWE 2K have got it absolutely spot on.
Same old shit every week. Yeah, nailed it on the head. You're in a simulation. This is what you got. Damn it.
It's the most accurate simulation you've ever seen in your life.
Exactly.
Because it's the same thing over and over. Okay then, so that aside, moving and switching tack, although actually there is a very easy comparison to make in terms of what we're going to talk about here, because I raised this question with you earlier today before we started recording. We were talking about potential topics of discussion, and it sort of blossomed into a conversation which we had to put on lockdown because we had to get into record mode, which was, I said to you, I don't think modern day WWE there are any gimmicks at all. I know I'm wrong on that. There's bound to be one or two in there somewhere that are like lingering, and I'll be like, oh God, I should have known, I should have remembered. But if you go back to the obvious easy example here would be the Gimmick Battle Royal, where like every lad in there was like, explain a wrestler in a sentence. He's a fella that loves earthquakes.
He's a fella that has another job on the side.
Yeah, kind of.
The Repo Man.
Yeah, Repo Man, Tugboat.
Yeah.
There's a theme, generally, not only with the theme music, with the outfit, with his look, etc., etc.
The Goon, part-time wrestler, part-time hockey player.
Yeah. The ultimate example of this, actually, ironically enough, is someone we're going to get to later on, who's still present day. But right now, I've said, modern day WWE, apart from maybe the obvious examples that I'm definitely missing, throw at me who's a gimmick in today's day and age, and use the definition of explain their gimmick in a sentence.
I've got one. The other Irishman that I didn't mention.
Prior to recording, we haven't just skipped it.
Baron Corbin's arch nemesis, Finn Balor, the Demon gimmick. I'm going to bring it out on special occasions, but not WrestleMania.
Yeah.
He gets himself all gimped up. I don't know what the difference between normal Finn Balor and Demon Finn Balor is. Yeah. It sounds fucking stupid, but once he's got face paint on,
he's a solid star.
Yeah, when he does the coup de grace or he hits any other move, all of a sudden it's a lot more powerful. It's a lot more demonic. That's the only gimmick there is. That's the only gimmick I can think of. And the problem is, when I get home later on and I'm lying in bed, all cuddled up, all wrapped up, I'm going to think of another one. I'm going to be like, God damn, I know what gimmick it was.
Fair enough. Okay, I'll link this very nicely then, because I thought you were going to hit me square in the eyes with the most obvious one, but this is a nice link.
If you say Goldust, I'm going to be right pissed off at you. Good.
We've already gone through this. And if we have to go through this on air, we'll go through this on air, which is that Goldust doesn't count because, yes, he might be technically attached to the current roster, but he's not a modern guy.
Okay.
It's not Modern Family, it's not the Rhodes family.
Who have we got that I'm missing then?
Well, no, the reason why this is the obvious one, but he also doesn't count, is The Undertaker.
Or his brother.
I don't even know what he's doing these days other than coming out and mayoring. Although, to be fair, an actual mayor would be a good...
Nay!
Not in that sense.
Is that what mayoring is?
Yeah. What, coming out and pretending to be a horse?
Yeah.
Would that get over?
Definitely.
Definitely.
You could come out as a rosebud. I've one of them weird... Don't you remember for a while, there was like people that wore like horse masks?
Oh, that, yeah.
Remember, there was loads of them knocking about. You could go to any like Poundland shop and you could buy a horse mask.
Yeah.
Become one of them.
They're still kind of a gimmick, sort of. Like you see them in gifs every now and then.
Yeah, I'll tell you what you see them on, stag do's.
Oh, God.
Full of wankers. You've got one that's wearing like the human sock or whatever it is, where we're all like in like a neon green suit, and there's always one in one of them fucking horse masks.
If you're going back, if you want to be that sort of inclined, like all these weird things that should and don't, they get over. I think this is my sort of issue with it, really, and this is partly why I arrived at the conclusion why there are no gimmicks these days. There are a couple of factors, but I think one of them is that like they get over to a point.
The problem is, if you're going to have a gimmick which involves a costume, unless you're a hell of a performer afterwards, they're never going to get you out of that costume. It's the same with James Ellsworth, wasn't it? He's known as this chinless wonder that, yes, he picked up a victory over your champion AJ Styles, but creative only have so much for you before it's like, wah, wah.
Well, here's the question that I would ask then is there a difference between a character and a gimmick? Because I would say what WWE have a lot of is characters, and also as well, they've got a lot of characters, but I would say those characters are very similar. Whereas I don't think that there are that many actual gimmicks.
I don't know, to some extent you could argue the Shield's a gimmick. It's a group of fellas that are some way part of this sort of... You're dressing up...
Vigilantes?
You're dressing up like you're a SWAT team or something. What are you playing at, man? You're a fucking wrestler. Get a grip of yourself. Take your stupid protective jacket off. One, you've ripped off bloody Bull Buchanan and Big Boss Man. Two, you ripped off D'Lo Brown. Alright? You don't need chest protectors. You're a wrestler. That's their gimmick. We're a vigilante group that are sort of this overriding power. Take that shit off, man. Go and become a fucking professional wrestler. Wear your tighty whities, wear your wrestling boots and elbow pads. You're done.
Which is ironic, because what do we want more of in wrestling? Oh wait, generic guys in tighty whities. No, we want less of them.
No, exactly. So we need more gimmicks.
This is what I'm saying. Like, we need more gimmicks. I'll give you that.
We need more gimmicks in terms of damn you lot and your generation for liking CM Punk too much. For CM Punk's argument of, oh, I've got my normal persona, I'm Philip Brooks, and I've just turned it up to 11. Look at me, I'm different.
Is this Philip Brooks from Dudley?
If Philip Brooks from Dudley?
Yeah.
No, I've taken my normal persona as CM Punk, I've dialed it up a notch so I'm a bit more exaggerated because that's how it comes across on TV, but I'm still the normal, regular guy that I can appeal to everyone for. And unfortunately, some of us, not naming any names, Stu, we're boring bastards in real life. So if we turn ourselves...
I don't know why you said my name in regard to that, because definitely I had nothing to do with that sentence, but carry on.
If we turn ourselves up to 11, you're still a boring sod. And unfortunately, for the likes of, oh, this will get me into trouble with people that are listening, Sheamus, Cesaro, Kofi Kingston, Xavier Woods, Rusev, Aiden English. Name me some other wrestlers. Give me another wrestler.
Sami Zayn.
Sami Zayn. Oh, that one hurt.
Am I right though, or am I right?
No, you're right. Turn your real life persona. I would argue against Sami Zayn because I love him so much. But like, turn your real life persona up to 11 or 12. Fucking turn it up to 15. You're still a boring bastard at the end of the day. You can't all do what CM Punk was implying.
I will say I agree with you in one sense. I do disagree with you in another sense, because while your point I get completely, I do think the foundation was already laid in there. In that era, one of our sort of mutual favourite eras, which gets underlooked in terms of the ruthless aggression era, when you get a lot of characters coming through, or a lot of guys coming through that have their real name, no real discernible gimmick, just they're a guy. Some people get gimmicks, i.e. John Cena went from a guy that just got angry to a rapper, and then eventually evolved into a guy again.
Yeah.
And some people have gimmicks to start with and then become a guy, as in Dave Bautista, who was a collectioner for the Reverend Devon. And then that's a hell of a gimmick, that is. And then he just became a guy. And so when you've got all that, real names, no gimmicks, Obi Trice, all that,
yeah,
that plants the seeds for me in terms of like, we're dealing with a group of guys now, or a collection of guys, that we don't need to just dress up as Doink the Clown or whatever. I would argue that there is ways to do that and be a bit more subtle or a bit more sort of clever about it. But once you make the decision of, we're not having wrestlers that have other day jobs, then you move away from that in a very specific way, and that's what they did.
Who are you thinking of specifically when you said that? Are you talking about the likes of Bret Hart, for example, and Shawn Michaels, people that had, not their real life names, not for Shawn Michaels anyway, but these are folks that had their real life name. They obviously had a backstory in terms of we trained and we became wrestlers. We didn't really, like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels didn't really have a gimmick, so we're going before the Attitude Era as well now. They didn't have gimmicks and they got over, didn't they?
Bret Hart had a gimmick in the sense of, and it's a weird one because a lot of people have this gimmick now. Far too many people have this gimmick now.
Yeah.
Bret Hart's gimmick was wrestling.
That should be all you need to get over as a wrestler.
I think it
Someone
works.
that tries hard. But the problem is, I'll tell you a more recent, when I say recent, it's in the old rabbit ears inverted brackets again. Someone that's gimmick is just wrestling. Guess who you've got? You've got Lance Storm. Alright? Someone that doesn't really have much of a personality. But Lance Storm and Bret Hart, their careers...
I wouldn't even say...
There's a Venn diagram for these bastards where they cross paths, where you've got the same person, a miserable looking Canadian man that's slightly past it, well, certainly nowadays.
I think the slight difference is that when Bret Hart is wrestling for the WWF title specifically, and I disagree with the Shawn Michaels point as well, but I'll deal with Bret Hart as well. He's surrounded by guys that are these kind of larger-than-life characters.
Are you saying it helps him then, by not having a gimmick specifically, by being just a generic... I said the word generic, I shouldn't say generic. Oh, detrimental.
But that's what I'm saying, it's like, when you've got all these colourful characters around you, you suddenly, just by being a wrestler...
You stand out, don't you?
Whereas,
you look like the real
how
deal.
many guys on the card now are wrestlers? Like, that's their gimmick. I would argue, like Daniel Bryan, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, that kind of ilk. That's what we're fed. They're wrestlers, they're these guys, they do this, they do that. And yes, there are maybe like subtle differences in all three of them, but all they are, in terms of like going back to the computer game discussion earlier, all they are is like various different like up and down points on the, when you create the wrestler in the first place.
Yeah, another generic, I say face, I don't mean it in that term, but just another face you're wrestling against.
If you have the guys that are out there, and if you have the guys that are so over the top, then it makes a normal guy look. It's the whole sort of, in a film, like you have the comedic guy and the straight man. The straight man like, only works if the guy's over the top. I'm not saying like WWE should have 1,000 sudden random gimmicks. I don't want like we go on to Raw next week and suddenly Bobby Lashley works for UPS or something. Although I kind of do want to see that very badly. He's the delivery man, he always delivers.
Right, he's got Leo Rush now.
Yeah.
Leo Rush, the man that causes arguments on Twitter, yet all of a sudden is being pushed onto Raw.
WWE do not have actual past history of someone causing a bit of trouble and then getting a push. I'm not looking at you, JBL.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't help. That doesn't work out.
The other point you made, when you said, oh, this is before the Attitude Era, you mentioned Bret Hart, which I've addressed. The other one you mentioned is Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels is a weird one, because I said, can you sum up their gimmick in one sentence? And it's weird, the closest sentence I can sum up to Shawn Michaels is an egotistical Bret Hart.
That's a bit mean on old Bret Hart. We're on different sides of the fence here, though, because you're pro Shawn Michaels, and unfortunately, however much it pains me to say, I'm pro Bret Hart all the way, because I think the difference between the two is, and I don't want this conversation to sway too far away from gimmicks. Like you said, Bret Hart was a great wrestler, but he let his wrestler do the talking. Shawn Michaels was a great wrestler, and he would tell you how much he was a great wrestler. And he did wrestling, because that's what wrestling is. It's telling a fucking story, and it's being a soap opera. What I've heard a lot since reading Bret Hart's book is, a lot of it is Bret Hart believed his own hype a bit too much. He was a mark, basically. He bought into wrestling as though it was a legitimate thing. So whilst he knew it's kayfabe and the results are predetermined, he bought into it. He believed that as a champion, you should be proud of this big gold belt that you should be fighting for. No, it's not a bad thing, but unfortunately, because of the clicks in wrestling and because of how wrestling is overall, it is a bad thing. He's the odd man out, isn't he? Because everyone else knows winning the belt is a gimmick, isn't it? Yes, you're getting the push and yes, you're making the big bucks, but guess what? Your belt isn't like winning the Champions League. It's not like winning the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship. It's not worth shit, unfortunately. All it's worth is the paper that someone's written on.
I would hugely disagree with that. That's definitely a podcast for another day. I think that being given the belt is specifically for a lot of people, not necessarily for Bret Hart, but for some people, it's a combination of years of work and effort and this. And I'm not saying that Bret Hart didn't put years of work and effort and this and that in, but I think Bret Hart was sort of one of these guys that was always going to get there. The easy analogy to make would be Anderson, £30 million Brazilian midfielder. I think he's a bum. He's got about 3 or 4 Premier League titles. Steven Gerrard's one of the greatest footballers England has produced, certainly probably one of the greatest footballers I will ever see. No Premier League titles. Which is better? Who's better? I know which one's better.
Yeah.
The difference I would say between what you're saying about Bret Hart and what I'm saying about Shawn Michaels is that, and yes, I know that Shawn Michaels is a massive dickhead backstage in these days, and there's no escaping that really. But in terms of what you see on screen, that's where I'm coming from. The gimmick of Bret Hart was the wrestler, and that was what he was. Shawn Michaels was the wrestler, but he'd tell you he was. Imagine the idea of coming up with a nickname, Mr. WrestleMania. I'm Mr. WrestleMania.
I know, but at the same time, I think it works in Shawn Michaels' favours, and you can see parallels between him and Bret Hart in terms of when Bret Hart had disappeared, or even before that, when Bret Hart wasn't in the main event scene, when he's doing the whole Hart Foundation, the anti-American, I'm a Canadian thing, when Shawn Michaels...
Which, by the way, was a gimmick. It's a great gimmick.
When Shawn Michaels is actually holding this belt, he's still surrounded by people that have gimmicks.
Yes.
He's still surrounded by Kevin Nash that's playing Diesel, that's this great big monster of a man, trucker, I'm a ladies' woman.
Well, first of all, he's called Diesel.
I'm a ladies' man sort of character. Then you've got him feuding against Vader for a very short period, but it's a man in a mask that is... But he's a trained accountant in real life, so his gimmick is, I'm a man that wears a mask.
Yeah.
You've got him against Psycho Sid, who's, well, my gimmick's in the name here. I'm a bit of a loony, and I'm a great big monster of a man. So you've got 3 people there that he's feuding against. That, again, coming back to the CM Punk argument, whilst these people that CM Punk was fighting against or feuding with, they didn't specifically have gimmicks, but it certainly plays against his whole, my gimmick is the real life element.
I think you've just sort of, from a completely different angle, hit upon the exact point that I was trying to make, which is that, like, at that time, it's actually an interesting parallel because CM Punk's come through. He's already feuded with Triple H and he's already feuded with Shawn Michaels, and he's already had that sort of touch at the top, so to speak. But the class of guys that you associate him with is John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, these guys that were just guys at that point. They had their own character, if you want to call it that, but this is, again, what I go back to. I think character is very different to gimmick. I think that we've said this before on a previous podcast. I think that maybe there are 3, 4, I don't even think there's as many as 5 different characters, full stop, in WWE right now, and you fit into that or that. Like, all you have to do is look at the women's division. The women's division is Ronda Rousey and Ronda Rousey's friends or Ronda Rousey's enemies. That's it.
The whole women's demographic, it's a different podcast and it's a different kettle of fish.
I just use them as the most extreme example. I just think that, like, in terms of the male roster, because I think, like, as you said, it's too hard to dissect the women's thing without going into too many different other angles. But for the male roster, it's very much a case of, like, you've got, let's say, the Shield, and if you wanted to take the high road, which you said earlier, and I'm fine with that, of what their gimmick is, but for a long time, Dean Ambrose was just Roman Reigns' friend or Seth Rollins' friend. One or the other. Neither of those are gimmicks and or characters. It's just random associations. And I get it, and I'm not suggesting that you need to sort of change Dean Ambrose specifically and turn him into this or that, but like the Lunatic Fringe, let's just use that.
Is that a gimmick? Is that a gimmick, or is that his character turned up to 11?
It could have been a gimmick.
It was a gimmick? He's not a nutcase in real life.
No.
That sounds very un-PC.
Yeah.
But like we said before, sticking your tongue out and doing a clothesline off the second rope isn't enough to make you a loony.
Yeah.
Alright? So no, if he wanted to go down the whole lunatic fringe and become, like, actually have the gimmick lunatic, then he should have turned it up even more, shouldn't he? He should have lived the character, but he didn't.
I'll link back to a guy you brought up earlier as someone that I couldn't possibly use in this debate, but Goldust. One of the things that made Goldust wasn't necessarily, obviously, I'm not going to ignore the face paint and the big outfit and all that, but was just the way he acted. And like this idea of like, you weren't sure if this guy was playing everyone for a fool and he was pretending to be this guy, or if he actually believed he was this guy and this was his sort of personality.
So what's that then? Just blurring the lines, really?
Yeah, but no, I'm saying that, like, obviously Goldust is such an extreme example of like, oh, you don't necessarily know what he's going to do, what he's capable of. But just bringing that back to Dean Ambrose, it's like, you do these wacky things where like he runs down the hot dog cart and whatever. At no point am I there going, he's doing that for either effectiveness, because he knows it's we know it's not effective, he knows it's not effective, and it doesn't make me think that he's any more or less unstable, so to speak, because someone more or less unstable wouldn't necessarily go condiments.
I think the problem is we've sort of touched a crossroads there in terms of, do we have too many straight guys, like you said? So unless you completely believe in your character, do you come across as just being wacky rather than being this character? I think that's the problem for Dean Ambrose, doing whatever he's doing to be this madman. When you're surrounded by lots of straight edge people and probably being a bit older and a bit more cynical when it comes to wrestling anyway, are you just
that
not?
Definitely doesn't help. Yeah.
What, the cynicism? Yeah. That's probably the biggest issue. It's just not buying into it anymore. Unless you're really playing up and hamming up your whole gimmick angle, it's just not going to work. It's just the accessibility to wrestling that's ruined it, really. Another example that you haven't mentioned, I don't know if you know enough about him to comment, but Brian Pillman, when he went through all of that where he basically rused Eric Bischoff to buy himself out of his contract to say, let's rally up and sort of stir up the internet by saying you've made me unemployed by cancelling my contract, and stupid old Eric Bischoff actually went ahead and cancelled his contract, so then he did jump ship to WWE. He still played backstage, even when the cameras aren't rolling, you're still playing that character, aren't you? It's method acting, and you stay in that character. And you'll hear a lot about this. If you're interested in films, look about Daniel Day-Lewis in multiple films.
Jim Carrey, Man on the Moon. If you've seen that documentary, that's incredible.
Where you're living, even when the cameras aren't rolling, you're living the character just because. That way, if you're buying into it, guess what? If you tell a lie long enough, other people will start buying into it as well. And I think, unfortunately, for poor old Dean Ambrose, I'd imagine when he went backstage and this man that was slightly unhinged and he's snogging the face off Renee Young, you must be going, for Christ's sake, there's something wrong here. That ain't quite working out, is it?
I think the current media landscape of the accessibility, is what you said, means that it's harder to do something like that. Interesting enough, I don't want to get too bogged down in this particular character, but while you were talking about it, reminded me of Nick Dinsmore and Eugene, who was, at the time, this is in the internet era, and was going through airports as that guy.
That's different kettle of fish again, isn't it? That's playing your gimmick and playing your gimmick.
Yeah, I know we've talked about it during this podcast, like the plus points and negatives about certain gimmicks, but I think that's one gimmick that we are happy to not have.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Yeah, certainly he is.
Jesus, man, why would you do that? When in real life, he seems like, from whatever I've heard of him from the internet, where he gives like these whole shoot interviews and things, he's like very down to earth sort of.
The ironic thing being is that him and Rob Conway were two of the biggest, hottest prospects of that particular era of. It wasn't OVW at that point, or it might have been just right at the arse end. I'm not sure, but like they were big guys that were going to make it dent, and then you got one of them that was Eugene. And yeah, sure, he had a run, but yeah, sure, he had that run.
Yeah.
And then the other one who was Rob Conway, who was at best La Resistance, at worst Randy Newman sings his intro, and I know he didn't, but it sounded like it.
Yeah, just I have a French relative from many different relations. I always get confused with a right midfielder that played for Reading.
Bobby Convert.
Gobby Comby.
Jeez.
You've got a hell of an elf on him.
That's a gimmick.
All the time.
Yeah, that's a gimmick. The question I want to ask then, as we wrap this up fundamentally, is it boils down to, we started this talking about what gimmicks there are in current modern day WWE, how these sort of things have risen and fallen, so to speak.
Sure.
What I want to know is, do we need them?
Definitely. I think, given our conversation just now, I think you need a few gimmicks. You almost need to employ temporary workers. We need a few temps on the roster.
I'm not going to lie.
Which everyone's a temp because they're all contractually, they're all contractors. But you need a few temps that are basically going in, which is your role is a 12 to 14 month contract where we're going to employ you, where you play this character. It might be a bit hit or miss. It's almost a gamble on WWE and Vince McMahon's part, where we're going to pay you this wage anyway, but we're going to get you in there to see if you hit or miss it anyway.
Is this why, and we've mentioned him a couple of times before, is this why The Undertaker's still around?
Yes, definitely. This is what it all comes down to. You need people that are going to live a gimmick to see if it hits or sticks. Because unfortunately, like examples like we mentioned in the past, Kofi Kingston, guess what? You had a gimmick at one stage. You're a Jamaican man.
No, but before you say anything, I am putting the kibosh down. I am immediately writing the line through any nation gimmicks. Like, that includes like Russia and, well, nowadays at least, and like Bulgaria.
Are you saying if you're a Johnny Foreigner, you haven't got a gimmick?
Not now, no.
Of course you fucking have. If you've got a gimmick, your gimmick is you're foreign hill, you're different from the rest of us. That's your gimmick.
No, I don't think that works in 2018, I'm sorry.
It shouldn't work, but it does.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. But do you at least see what I mean though? I'm not having as a nationality.
Well then what else can you have as your gimmick? You need to basically have I'm a wrestler at one hand, I'm a council worker on the other.
Can I actually, I've just thought of something here, and can I actually sort of rewind on this whole idea? And this is interesting because we've been speaking about this as a negative, but it's just occurred to me, like, you know, this whole idea of the character and the guy.
Yeah.
There was a guy who managed to make three characters work, Mick Foley. And it's hard for me to turn around and say you have to be that kind of promo to make it work, but I think that basically what you have to do is, if you're going to have gimmicks now, then you have to be obviously more clever and more subtle than we've seen, which is, again, makes it in and of itself the gimmick harder, because the gimmick tends to be either a nationality or a job.
Mick Foley isn't a prime example because of the times that he actually worked 3 gimmicks at once. If we detract old Dude Love, Cactus Jack and Mankind, all you've got is Mick Foley.
Which he was more...
And did Mick Foley work in TNA?
No, but Mick Foley worked.
Mick Foley worked as a commissioner. Guess what? Being the commissioner is your gimmick.
Yeah.
It is your gimmick because it's your other job. I was a wrestler / commissioner.
But now here's the thing about Mick Foley in terms of those whole things, is that wasn't he Mick Foley longer than he was any of those guys? Possibly,
but then if you're getting away from the gimmick and you're becoming the character, like you said earlier, of the character of being Mick Foley, is it half as memorable as anything he did beforehand?
True, I'll give you that, yeah.
Do people know Mick Foley for being Mick Foley? I think, see, I'm going to counter-argument this. I'd say people do, but that's only because of his outside success away from wrestling. People know Mick Foley as the person, and I'm not even talking character now. People know Mick Foley for what he is because of his books that he's had, where he's had 3 of them that have, unfortunately for number 3, became bestsellers otherwise. Mick Foley for going around and touring and having these sort of, are they even comedy shows or are they just biopics? Q&A sessions. And people know Mick Foley, but people only know Mick Foley based on his I'd argue, one previous character. They know Mick Foley because of Mankind.
Yeah.
You're only going to get hardcore people that know Mick Foley because of Duke Love or Cactus Jack.
I'd redact that slightly.
No, actually, I'm going to redact that. I'm going to step in. You know when Matt stands on his soapbox and gets a bit on his high horse and starts like raving about things, and we're going to need theme music because this seems to be a common occurrence whenever we're doing this podcast. I get a little bit het up about things and I like to mention it with a bit more conviction in my voice. In the instance of Mick Foley, if we didn't have Mankind, would Mick Foley be as successful as he is nowadays with his books, with his Q&A sessions that he seems to do all the fucking other time? He's always doing it. Every other week he seems to be over in Britain promoting a little talk show with Mick Foley. If we didn't have Mankind, the gimmick Mankind, would he be over as much as he is, and would he have this career?
Can I be really contrarian?
No. Are you going to say something like, oh, if Bastian Booger wasn't a great big fat slob, would we know him as the actual person? Would we know him as the real person? If Vader didn't wear a mask, would he be as successful as far as being Timmy White?
No, the question I was going to ask is, would Mankind have worked were it not Mick Foley? It's a chicken and egg situation.
Of course it would have worked. It was the era of the gimmicks.
So you're saying you give anyone that sort of outfit, that sort of gimmick, it would have worked?
Yes.
No.
No, yes it would. And this is coming back to what we said the other week about the NWO and Steve Austin, how they ran parallel to each other. You had this anti-authority situation where if you swapped over Eric Bischoff and Vince McMahon, one of them would have won at the end of the day. Steve Austin and the NWO worked hand in hand. They were anti-authority, weren't they? That's what they were. They were bringing the real-life working man into a wrestling situation. And so it would have worked for Mick Foley. So there.
Okay. And I think the stupid part about all that is that if you look at the guys that can cut promos now, I don't think we've got a single person that is on Mick Foley's level, but like across the board, you'd say there are a higher level of charisma. Mm-hmm. And so you would think that people could pull off gimmicks more these days, but I do think that we're not stuck because I think wrestling is very cyclical, but I do think the way the wrestling industry is working right now is, especially with the independent circuit, not necessarily in WWE, but WWE have been doing this for some time now. I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. It's the thing what I said earlier, it's the real names, it's the whole idea of like, you're your own creative entity, and for as much as we rag on the writers and WWE creative and what they come up with and what they do, there's much more freedom now than before. You only have to, I know you mentioned them before as different characters, and I couldn't nail them down as to who they are, what they are, but like the New Day wouldn't have been able to happen for some time. It's not quite as creative freedom as just go out there and cut a promo, but it's getting more toward that. So maybe we'll inch ourselves closer towards a place where it's like some guy comes out and wants to be a baseball player for no particular reason. I don't know. Like, I know I said this before, and I know I asked this question, like, do we need gimmicks, right? Would the audience accept gimmicks? Because I just said, oh, like our baseball players, a random example. Like, do you think like the current WWE, the current audience at the top level would take that? I know like certain local shows that we go to, there are certain guys that have certain gimmicks, and it's like, yeah, you accept it. But at a global level, if some guy come out and went, I'm a postal worker, would that ever get like anything other than shit on?
No, I don't think so. And I think the problem is as well, coming back to the actual work rate that wrestlers put in, superstars work a hell of a lot more than they did in the Attitude Era or the New Generation Era. Their work rate in terms of their athleticism or even day to day in terms of what they have to do, whereby they get out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, go to the gym, they stick to this strict diet of eating like, I don't know, 6-7 meals a day. I'm no bodybuilder, but people that are in that industry, even if you're not in a high intensity sporting role, say you're a golfer, probably naysaying for golfers because I don't know enough about them. But
what a great gimmick that'll be, Kerwin White coming back.
Yeah, if you're a golfer, you're still eating at specific times of the day. You're still eating 8 to 9 different meals a day rather than just your breakfast, lunch, and tea every night. aren't you? You're still living that lifestyle, and I think the problem is for wrestlers and superstars the fact that if you're then doing a show 6 nights out of 7, if you then have to go and do a house show, travel for the rest of the day, eat all of this a certain amount of time, we've only got so much time to live our lives, haven't we?
So,
and you're also trying to hold down a family life or a love life as well. I just don't think it's possible, and I think during the Attitude Era or the New Generation Era, you weren't working that many nights of the year.
So you could live your life and live the gimmick, whereas now you can't do both.
And now I don't think it's possible. I think it's too hard. Yeah. And I think that's a reflection on WWE as a whole. Like you said, if we go back to indie shows that we watch, I don't know if it goes as far as New Japan. It's difficult for people in New Japan. I think you're really talking low-level indie leagues. I think progress at a push is... Because even if you're working at Progress, you're an indie wrestler, and so you're working all these different sort of federations as well. Even if you're at a lower level, it's getting difficult. I think unless you're working, basically, you're working a 9 to 5 job and then wrestling on a Saturday or Sunday night, I think it's going to be difficult to be holding down, as well as your personal life, an actual gimmick and trying to make that believable.
The other thing as well is that, I know I said this about the audience, that in the 90s, no one cared. I know it was more kayfabe in that time, but like, if you brought out the repo mat today, right, there would be 2 reports, and the 2 reports would be, first of all, the crowd doesn't care about this gimmick because no one buys a repo mat, and the second report would be, do you know he's not actually a repo mat?
Unless you've got one hell of an indie following, so for the likes of Daniel Bryan or CM Punk again as an example, unless you've got one hell of an indie following, so people that are really invested in wrestling as a whole, people that are prepared to put time in to watch 3 hours of Raw and 2 hours of SmackDown, and then your pay-per-views, and then go and watch indie shows, Ring of Honor, Progress Wrestling, Preston City Wrestling, whatever promotion you want to mention, unless you're really invested and you're putting that time behind a wrestler. So, say I was an indie wrestler, and I've got a gimmick, so I've got a Repo Man gimmick. If I eventually made it to the big leagues, which I'm not going to anyway, because the WWE and Vince McMahon aren't prepared to invest in gimmicks nowadays, then they don't care for that, and they still don't. Unfortunately, for the last few years, whilst it seemed to take a step back with the likes of Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart and smaller guys overall, so then jumping forward to CM Punk's and Daniel Bryan's, Vince McMahon, the underlying fact is he still likes big burly guys, he still likes big, tall, muscly, handsome looking blokes, hence the reason you've got the likes of Roman Reigns. And you still got Seth Rollins is maybe a step down from that, but you still got a Samoa Joe even, as an argument, you still got a Brock Lesnar. They're still big, burly, angry-looking blokes, and that's what wrestling's all about. See, that makes me sound like him. So unless you've got that indie following where people are going to get behind you, so if you stuck Jimmy Havoc, if he made a bigger name for himself over in America, he'd be over if he made it to the Fed. Of course he would, but that's only because you've got the people that are paying the bills and actually buying the merchandise. So basically, they're not marks, are they? They're the men in the audience that boo Roman Reigns. That sort of fan that's invested in these smaller blokes.
Your bigger guys, in terms of both then and now, I still see them as not really a gimmick. Like the whole Vince McMahon sees a massive guy like Lex Luger's not a gimmick. The narcissist is as close. Like the narcissist is a character. It's not a gimmick.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter if it's... see, now we're veering away from gimmicks. We're almost looking at, if you're a big bloke, you're good enough to be in the federation. You make the 200 roster.
This is what I'm saying. You've got the wrestlers, the big bastards. We're talking about, if you think about all the characters that we're talking about the guys that aren't either of those. And now, what you tend to have is the wrestlers and the big bastards.
I'll mention a name. I don't know if you know enough about him, but like we said at the top of the podcast, in terms of video games and that, Tommaso Ciampa, who hasn't made the first cut for the next WWE game.
Which I meant to say this at the start of the podcast when we talked about it. I think that's a work. I think that's part of his character.
I don't think it's a work. I think it's let's make a bit more money by putting him in as DLC. But if you take this guy who's been at the top of his game for fucking donkey's years now, and we're talking he's got an indie following as well. It's not like he was a nobody that came up through Florida Championship Wrestling and maybe gets 1 or 2 matches on NXT. He's a bloke that has been at the top of his game, even if it's been in the tag team division or the heavyweight championship division for NXT. If you stick him into Raw or SmackDown, has he got a gimmick? What's his gimmick? He ain't got a gimmick.
His gimmick's a heel, that's it.
That's all it is.
He's a bad person.
It's literally, he's a baddie. Bald, beard, baddie. The Triple
That's
H.
a great fucking t-shirt, I'm not going to lie.
Oh no. Money in the bank, Stu, don't worry.
Yeah.
I'll get on old Photoshop later on. We'll knock that up. I don't know if it's veering away from the whole gimmicks argument, but if you stick him, a man that's at the top of the top of what you can do, his matches are quality. It doesn't matter who he's against. His matches are fucking brilliant. If you stick him on Raw or SmackDown, he's going nowhere. He's going nowhere because he hasn't got the look. And so we're talking about looks versus gimmicks now. So does this man, if say one of us two, if we're wrestlers and we've got a so-so, we're fucking brilliant at wrestling, we've got a so-so following, yeah? It's lukewarm, our following. If we went to Raw or SmackDown, what's going to happen? I don't think we go anywhere. Because we haven't got the right look at the end of the day. So I don't think it matters what your gimmick is. We haven't got the right look to tick the boxes for Vince McMahon because we don't look like angry, big bastards.
So in 2018, you need to have a combination of the look for the audience and the look for Vince.
I think so. One of those boxes certainly needs to be ticked. Either you've got the massive indie following, and so you're getting people to part their money to buy your shirts and all that shit that comes along with it, or Vince McMahon likes the look of you.
Again, I think this goes back to what I said a moment ago. You've got your indie darlings, who are your smaller guys.
Yeah.
Your big bastards, who are your Vince's guys. Who's the in-between? That's all I'm going to say. We're going to have to stop. We're going to have to put an abrupt end. This has been an absolute brawl of a podcast. This has been an I Quit match from NWA 1979. This has been Beyond the Beermat. Thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.